Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Our final fellow session today centers measurement, meaning making, and cultural space. These projects challenge dominant metrics and frameworks, asking who defines success, what counts as thriving, and how do HBCU environments encode memory, identity, and belonging. And so we will have our presenters go today, our fellows go today. So Dr. Gilliam, introduces the BWS STEM Index, redefining what it means for Black women to function and thrive in STEM environments. And Dr. Miller explores public art across HBCU campuses, examining how space, memory, and narrative shape institutional identity. So we will start, I believe, with Dr. Gilliam. Are you going first? I believe so. There you go.
All right. Can you all hear me and see me well? And then it's the PowerPoint in full PowerPoint mode. Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Shantesica Gilliam, Assistant Professor in the Environmental Health Sciences Department at Spelman College. And my project is naming what we carry, measuring how we thrive toward a Black woman functioning in STEM index. And I am also a proud HBCU Center HCRN Research Fellow. So to start off with some introductions, I want to first talk about my positionality and who I am. So I come to this work not as an outside observer, but someone who has lived at the tensions and at the center of it. So I'm a first generation college graduate who entered higher education drawn to STEM, but I was pushed out of it. And it was not because of a lack of ability, it was not because of lack of passion, but by the environments that were not built for me in mind. And that experience did not end my relationship with STEM or with science, but it just redirected it. So today I stand before you all and also my STEM students as a professor who brings a public health lens to their education. So asking not just how we measure, but who gets counted, who gets protected, and who gets to belong. So my positionality is personal and it's also professional. I know what it feels like to be unsupported in a space where you're told that you cannot inhabit, that you could inhabit. And I know what it looks like to return to that space with the tools to name it, to study it, and to change it. And I share this not to center myself in this research or in this presentation today, but to be very transparent about the work and why this matters to me. And to also signal to anyone who is in this space or in this room who has carried something similar that your experience is valid and it is also data as well. So to start with the gap, 8.2% of STEM workers are Black, according to the National Science Foundation. And this data is a little old, but they haven't updated it yet, but this was in 2021. And then 18% of women hold STEM occupations. But today I am centering 26 voices, 26 women who did interviews that center on their lived experience as STEM scholars. So existing research, it focuses on barriers, it focuses on deficits, but not necessarily thriving and what it means and what the definition of thriving in this space is. It also treats Black women as a monolith, and we know that we all have different lived experiences, and we are different, and we hold different identities. Um, the existing research also celebrates resilience, but not questioning why we need resilience in this space. And of course, we have no national data on Black women specifically in STEM. So this research that I've been working on is center Black women's voices and lived experiences. It helps us define functioning, achievement, and success for Black women in STEM. It reframes functioning as dynamic and embodied. And then I am working towards developing a measurement tool for holistic thriving and not just persistence. And this research is, of course, grounded in critical theories that support Black women's development, like Black feminist theory or Black feminist thought and intersectionality. So talking about the three theoretical frameworks. First, intersectionality, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. This brings multiple identities, including race, gender, class, and more. And it talks about the structures and those unique barriers that guides us more into an inclusive space and also inclusive research design. And then we move on to Social Identity by Carlone and Johnson in 2007, where they talk about performance recognition, self-concept, and STEM belonging and how that's linked to persistence. And then also how identity, STEM identity specifically, shapes achievement. And this is extended here to include the thriving piece that I talked about. And then we have Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins, which centers Black women's self-definition. It challenges those dominant narratives like resilience that we see in this space. It also talks about survival through authenticity, and then it talks about the importance of community and collective knowledge making for Black women. So, all in all, with these theoretical frameworks, functioning is not individual grit, it is structural, it is relational, and it's also political. So, to talk about the methods, so for the data collection, we use a qualitative narrative inquiry piece through focus groups, and we also use Black feminist reflexivity. So through the positionality that I talked about, my lived experience, and I also had some students who were a part of the data collection process who are also STEM scholars. Throughout the process, we reflected on our identity and what we bring and what we hold into this space, and what does it look like for us to collect this data and to analyze this data as well. So we conducted 6 focus groups via Zoom from July 2024 to February 2025. And the focus groups were about 60 to 90 minutes each. And each group had about 4 to 6 STEM scholars. And we tried to make sure all of our STEM scholars had some type of identity that was a shared or collective identity. So that could be undergraduates or students who all went to HBCUs or students who were all in medical school or students who were all professional, but they all, of course, had something in common in that they were Black women and STEM scholars. And we have a representative sample from institutions from HBCUs, PWIs, minority serving institutions, and also Hispanic serving institutions who are all at diverse disciplines in different career stages in their journeys. So the process for analyzing this data, so we collected the data, we transcribed it, and each of our transcripts were independently coded by our research team, including me and also my student researchers. And then we came together for a cross-team consensus building called Code to Agreement to make sure that we were all aligned when we coded our data. And through that, we did a thematic and narrative analysis. So we themed from the coded segments and we translated those themes into survey items. And we made sure that we included those theoretical frameworks, especially intersectionality as this piece, as a through line throughout our process. So to talk about the results. Here from our data, we came up with a conceptual model in 5 domains for Black women functioning in STEM. So this includes our structural barriers and our institutional climate. And here we ask how systems and higher education institutions shape our experiences. So whether it's at a HBCU where those experiences were really fostered and it felt like a safe space, or whether those students who were at predominantly white institutions where they often didn't feel like they belong, and they had some challenges navigating through those spaces because they didn't see themselves represented in front of the classroom or among their classmates. We looked at systems in both ways and how they shaped the experiences of these students. Our next domain is identity negotiation and authenticity. So this is how Black women navigate identity and lived experience in STEM spaces. So how did they define Black womanhood? How did they define themselves? And then how did they also position their other identities, whether it's first generation, whether it is first generation immigrant, whether it is their religion, or if they were multiracial, how did they use their identity and how did they navigate their identity and lived experience in the STEM spaces? So we were able to write a paper on the identity and negotiation piece called Beyond the Binary, and that paper is currently under review at this moment. Our next domain, our third domain, is about community, mentorship, and networks of support. And that is really asking how do relational survival support those thriving strategies? So whether it's support from their mentors, their professors, their other classmates, their community, their friends, how do those people help foster their achievement in STEM? Our next domain is resilience, resistance, and agency. So we're not completely dismissing resilience, even though it is a dominant narrative in what we see in the literature now, but we want to see how can we move beyond coping so that we can highlight that intentional survival. So a lot of our students talked about, and I'll show y'all a little bit more later, direct quotes from them, but a lot of them talked about coping and celebrating themselves when they did achieve or when they didn't achieve, to help that survival and that thrival piece while they were navigating through STEM. And then our last domain is thriving, well-being, and future visioning. So this is how scholars situate holistic health and well-being to take care of their future selves. So we asked them questions about how is their mental health right now at the moment? What are some things they're doing to foster not only their mental health and physical health? So, just going a little bit deeper into the domains, and I want to show you all how we mapped on the domains. We created scale items from each theme that we found or each domain that we mapped, and then also just an example quote from our students, or from the scholars who participated in the study. So that first one where we talked about structural barriers and institution, just by looking into the narratives from our students, one of the example scale items we wanted to include in our index is that my institution values my cultural background and perspective. And just one quote to really bring all of that in. One student said, "I feel like in this day and age, we're at a time where people are recognizing just how little Black women are credited for what they can bring to the table. And in doing that, I feel like we're trying to make a more uplifting environment, especially attending an HBCU, just supporting." And so here, this quote really just illustrates that piece where I was talking about a little earlier about how HBCUs can foster that sense of an uplifting environment and help them matriculate through their STEM process a little bit better. The second domain, identity, negotiation, and authenticity, our scale item was I suppress parts of myself to maintain professionalism in STEM spaces. So a lot of our students talked about conforming to the spaces that they're in. Even students that were at historically Black colleges or universities, they still went out in the world and had internships in predominantly white spaces and still felt like they had to be hyper aware of themselves. So a quote of a student said, "So being like in relation with other PWIs and interacting with people from PWIs, I feel just more hyper aware of myself. How are you speaking? How does your hair look? I don't want to be judged or like a stereotype, and I know that's not the right way to think." Our next domain, where we talked about community mentorship networks and support, we created a scale item to specifically this one that I pulled out was about faculty members in their academic field for guidance and mentorship. And one student stated, "I'm lucky to have a lot of mentors. I think in untraditional ways, of course, I have academic advisors, some for classes, some for pre-health, because I have three academic advisors. They do different things depending on what I'm focused on at that moment." So this student really just talked about having multiple mentors, multiple advisors, different people that they can lean on depending on their needs and how important that is to help their matriculation throughout the STEM journey as well. We also have resilience, resistance, and agency. So this example scale item that we created from this one is I felt my coursework contributed to my strength and autonomy, better equipping me to be successful in the future. And we pulled a quote from a computer science major who said that we do have a lot of programming classes. So a lot of the people in my classes were coding since they were in middle school and had those resources. And they took those classes at their school, but it was kind of hard for me because I was never introduced to that. Or even if you try to get into it, they wouldn't put you in a class for you to do that. So this student really talked about how that laying the foundation even before they went to college felt a little different for them because they weren't introduced to STEM before they came into their field. And then the last one, which is thriving, well-being, and future visioning. An example scale item that we have here is I intentionally take breaks to protect my mental health while pursuing my STEM goals. And a student said, have your moment to take a break. And I think it's also taught me to learn to take breaks and not quit. I'm like, okay, we can afford breaks every now and then. So it really speaks to how students are not pushing themselves. They're pushing themselves to get to where they need to be, but they aren't pushing themselves beyond their capacity to achieve in STEM. And they're telling themselves that it is okay to take breaks. It is okay to to fail. And so these domains really just summed up what we found throughout these focus groups. And then we developed over 100 scale items. So these were just a few that I could show y'all today, but we developed over 100 scale items, about 20 scale items per domain. And we're going to ask them these questions on a scale from 1 to 10, a Likert scale, um, to gain a little bit more of their more information on what does it mean to function in STEM. So to conclude, we have research policy and practice implications. For research, of course, we need more ongoing qualitative and intersectional studies, especially studies that center those critical theories that are important to Black women's development, like Black feminist thought and intersectionality. I also think it's important for us to track strategies across career stages, not just starting on or not just starting at when they get into it, but before and then also after, so that we can know what we need to do to make sure that people stay in STEM and that they achieve. Um, I also think it's important to develop and validate the Black women functioning in STEM index items. And then longitudinal designs across institution types are important as well, so that we can get a better idea of what's happening at predominantly white institutions, what's happening at minority serving institutions and HBCUs as well. For policies, I think it is very important for us to be more transparent in our evaluation processes, and that is whether the exams that we give our students or how we're evaluating achievement in general. We should also recognize mentoring as scholarly labor. So as we know throughout the tenure process, when you have to turn in your tenure packet, that mentorship or that service piece is not often weighed as much as teaching or research. And I think it's very important for us to recognize mentoring as scholarly labor, especially among faculty at historically Black colleges and universities, because we are doing more labor through being representation, through being mentors, through being advocates for our students as well. And that's where that equitable workload distribution also comes in. And then I think we should also move beyond that representation rhetoric. And then for practice, it's important to affirm STEM environments for all students. I think we should also have some faculty development grounded in Black feminist theory and Black feminist thought, so that our faculty can be more aware of the lived experiences of Black women who are sitting in front of them in the classrooms. We should also have some mentoring structures that are rooted in intersectionality and not necessarily a hierarchical approach, but something more reciprocal between students and faculty. And then institutional support for authentic thriving is also important. So the road ahead for me, phase one, we're going to take our scale items and conduct interviews with Black women STEM scholars to show how index items are interpreted. And then we're going to pilot those index across diverse institutional contexts. And then we'll develop the Black women functioning in STEM index as a standalone methodological contribution. We want to send this out, make sure we have them at institutions so that our institutions know what resources we need to allocate to our students so that they can succeed and thrive in STEM. And just to leave everyone with this one quote from a doctoral student in public health who participated in our study. And she said that Black womanhood doesn't have a definition because it's so expansive, but the beauty of Black womanhood is that it can look however you want it to look. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilliam. That is absolutely a great quote to close with. I saw Dr. Miller. She's not pinned on here for me yet, but I know that Dr. Miller will be our next presenter, our final presenter for these sessions today. And so I'm going to give her, another minute or so to pop back on. And I'm sure Dr. Wade and Jai is trying to help with that behind the scenes as well as Dale. But while we are transitioning and waiting for her to come on, I don't want to ask the questions that I have for both of you, but I will ask you a sole question right now. So looking at my notes because I had lots because I love this. I identify with a lot of this as well. I'll just ask, what was one of the largest standout pieces with the different experiences of the women from the different campus types? And we'll just have that one question, then Dr. Miller will go.
I think one of the biggest standout pieces is that these students are actively redefining what STEM looks like for them. And they are not taking anything. They're talking about their advisors want them to be up super late, doing all-nighters, getting work done. And they're like, no, that's just not supportive of me. And that's not supportive of my mental health. And it really seems like they are reclaiming what it looks like to achieve in these spaces, and they're making sure to center themselves in it all. Thank you so much for your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Excited to talk to you about it more in a moment. So, Dr. Miller, if you are ready, you can go ahead and share your presentation, and the floor is yours.
I apologies. I think my system may have crashed. So I will try
You
to
sound
share.
now great. So, yep,
Oh,
and we're seeing the screen.
and um, okay. And do you see me as well?
We see you, the screen just left. It was there, and then I think maybe you clicked something else and it went away. So, maybe one more time, try to go full screen and share.
Let's see. Share. And then and
I think when you're hitting play from start, it's not connecting on on Zoom. So um, the
okay.
step right before putting it full screen, we are able to see.
Okay. So are you seeing it right now?
Not at this moment.
Okay. Are you seeing right now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Then I'm not going to share the whole screen. I'm just going to do one at
Okay.
a time. That'll work better.
Okay. There you
Okay.
go.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And thank you for attending my session today entitled Legacy Landscapes, Public Art in HBCU Spaces. My name is Kari Miller, and I serve as the program director of the NYU Washington, D.C. Center, and I also teach Africana Studies for the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at NYU. I'm also a proud alum of both Howard University and Spelman College. And before I begin, I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Howard University HBCU Center for their generous support and encouragement of this highly interdisciplinary project on public art at HBCUs. And this work is in the making, so it is a work in progress, and I look forward to sharing an overview of my work with you. Okay, so the project itself is situated into the broad interdisciplinary cultural studies of Black visual culture. So, since their inception, HBCUs have had a long and distinguished history in visual culture. So, this photo of Morris Brown baseball players from the U.S. Library of Congress collection was part of W.E.B. Du Bois's photo exhibit at the 1900 World Fair in Paris, France. And it's entitled The American Negro Exhibit. And nearly 120 years later, you may have seen this piece honored by contemporary artist and Howard University alum Bisa Butler, who recreated the print as a colorful quilted mural in the artwork To God and Truth, which highlights Morris Brown College as the first educational institution for higher learning created exclusively for African Americans in Georgia. And Butler's work is published in the visual collection Fabric of a Nation, American Quilt Studies. And so HBCU tradition of visual culture. So the figure on the right is owned by Hampton University, which is the first HBCU to collect African American art, according to the cultural critic and writer Yvonne Benau. Hampton was the first HBCU to start collecting visual art in 1894 when they acquired the oil paintings of artist Henry Asawa Tanner, including the painting of the banjo lesson. And this rich legacy of Black visual culture at HBCUs continues with professional organizations highlighted on the left, including the National Association of Artists from HBCUs and the Alliance of HBCU Museums and Galleries. In addition, the NEA, NEH, and the Smithsonian have all recently provided research funding and support for initiatives supporting HBCU visual art production and practice. So this ecosystem of professional practice and cultural interest are critical to my current project on public art in HBCU spaces. So what is public art? Public art can fall into many definitions, including works that are specifically commissioned by public funds and sources. However, public art can also include simply art accessible to the public in the public domain. So for my project, I focus specifically on art in HBCU spaces, externally accessible to the public, including murals, statues, memorials, and outdoor sculptures. So this photo showcases a mural on the campus of Alabama State University, created recently in 2024. So my work is uniquely interdisciplinary. My background is specifically in African and African American literature. So this project grew out of field visits with my NYU students to the campus of Howard University as we studied the contributions of Elaine Locke in mentoring writers and artists of the Harlem Renaissance. What was clear about Howard was the abundance of outdoor visual images, sculptures, and memorials that adorned the campus. I became interested in understanding how other HBCUs held space for visual culture in public spaces, like that of Howard and Hampton universities, specifically in the context of theoretical frameworks in the humanities to create broader conversations in the classroom for other community educators like myself, who have access to HBCU campus portals as living museums in our communities. Ultimately, my goal is to develop a broader conversation of key themes inherent in the HBCU campus as a living space of cultural heritage as represented through public art. So my methodology, my current study involves beginning with local HBCUs in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, as listed. And the first step is the development of visual catalogs, which are very informal, but entail physically surveying campuses to photograph artwork accessible outdoors to the public. Thus far, I've made initial visits and catalog compilations of Howard University, Bowie State, and partially at Hampton University. Developing collections also involves literature reviews on selected works of art, and this work builds into the development of key themes for further analysis. So these themes. So based on my initial field research, I am building a visual collection around the themes of time, memory, and belonging in the development of a theoretical framework grown out of cultural theories of numerous scholars. And these are my key scholars. The primary scholars I'm drawing from are listed on the left, with time drawing from Irvin Hunt's Dreaming the Present, time aesthetics and the Black cooperative movement. And the framework of memory is built upon Christine Sharp's incredible slave ship discourse of In the Wake on Blackness and Being, and discourse on belonging continued from the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates's Between the World and Me and Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother, A Journey Along the Atlantic Slave Route. So much of my work, while grounded in the affirmation theories, works to address the historical joy-centered nature and symbolism of HBCU campuses that are created out of hope and reconstruction as represented in selected pieces of public externally facing art, broadening African American historical public history of plantation tourism and slave ship trauma to localize remembrance in the existence of the Black built environment and historical structures of HBCUs. Ultimately, my goal is to develop a broader conversation of key themes inherent in the spirit of the HBCU campus of the United States through the cultural lens of time, memory, and belonging. And as a living embodiment of this theme, the photo in the center of the arc is Emancipation Oak at Hampton University, which thrives on the campus today and is nearly 200 years old. The upkeep and preservation of the oak in the space of the campus in many ways is symbolic of HBCU spaces as sites of memory through time. And thank you again to the Howard University HBCU Center for funding this work, and I am happy to discuss any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. So now, Doctors Miller and Gilliam, I have some questions for you all. So my first question is this, so both of your projects redefine measurement, right? One is qualitative, one is cultural, which I think is a really cool way to measure things. How do we expand what counts in HBCU research?
I think I can start by saying what counts really matters when we center the experiences of HBCU communities, and also we center these experiences as legitimate data. We still have some just talk around quantitative versus qualitative, which one is more rigorous, which one really counts as data. And I think lived experience is valid and it is legitimate data. And we can also pair quantitative or survey scores together with art, and then also with the lived experiences and those cultural narratives and senses of belonging and ancestral ways of knowing. These things can all exist together. It doesn't have to be one versus the other. Um, and we know that thriving at HBCUs may look different than thriving in other places like predominantly white institutions. And our measurements should reflect that difference and it shouldn't erase it.
And I also like to add to that, just like Dr. Gilliam brought in um, Black feminist theory, right? I think it's important to recognize the idea that HBCUs are, in addition to being educational institutions, they are living museums and memorials. There's a shared culture and heritage that has taken place post 1865 that lives within our research, lives within our spaces, and it's something that's very unique to the institution. Understanding that when we have current students, they're in the same space and time as students from 1860, as students from 1960. And there are lived experiences from those time periods that we have to recognize within our work and research that's different from the PWI structure.
Absolutely. And I think this kind of leads nicely into one of our questions that we have in the Q&A for you, Dr. Miller, which is, could you share a little bit more about the trauma that you mentioned from what you were seeing in the art?
Right. So when I was speaking about trauma, I was speaking specifically about creating another type of site of remembrance in African American history that's outside of or in addition to what we normally study in academia, which are tours of Monticello, right? Of plantation spaces, of spaces where something negative has happened, like slavery. What I wanted to do with HBCUs is I wanted to really look at the other side of that and look at what happens after Reconstruction and the joy that is created outside after the trauma, right? Going forward. And I could not use it yet in my work because I'm still getting reprint rights, but there's a beautiful sculpture on the side of Howard University's engineering building by the artist Elizabeth Catlett. And it's called Student Aspire. It's a ginormous commissioned statue, and it's one of my students' favorite because there's an African American man and an African American woman embracing each other and reaching upward for equality, while around them there's all of the symbols of science. But at the bottom of their feet, there's a root that goes towards African mask and ancestors. So it's kind of pulling together. I don't want to not necessarily, I don't want to necessarily ignore trauma, but I want to add the voices of joy and hope that comes out of the HBC movement so that historians worldwide are studying that too, and not just seeing our history as rooted in Monticello and slave plantations. Right. Great question.
Wonderful. Yeah, that was a good question. And as I'm sitting here listening to you all speak, I'm understanding why Drs. Carter and Dr. Wade and Jaya chose this for me to moderate because this is right up my alley in different ways, right? In the STEM and the education of it all, and then also with the art and the cultural significance of HBCUs and Black learning spaces in general. So do have another question for you all. So, what are the risks of relying on those traditional metrics when studying HBCU communities? So, Dr. Gilliam, I'll hand that question to you, thinking outside of the box with your methodology and development of a framework.
Yeah, those traditional methods were largely built on and for predominantly white institutions with white people in mind. It was validated within predominantly white institutions. So when we apply them, I would say like uncritically to HBCUs, that really risk telling us what makes us strong. And in that case, when we're applying those predominantly white ideas to HBCUs, we may be measuring deficits when in actuality, that's where we might see resilience. And we might see community, we might see identity affirmation, we might see cultural pride. And those are the things that drive success. And those are the reasons why our HBCUs have been thriving for so long. So when we are using those traditional methods, we risk that danger of leading to bad policies, campus designs that don't fit our student experiences as well.
Thank you for that response. And to your point of policy, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Miller. I have a question for you. How can your work inform policy, campus design, or student experience strategies?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think I'm looking forward specifically to broadening this conversation about the HBCU as a living museum and honoring what came before in terms of our student body and our alumni. And in terms of the student experience, HBCUs, and some more than others, are giving the students this education outside in order to support um, the memory of the student experience. So I want to continue to kind of focus on uh, the good work, the amazing work a lot of the universities, really including definitely Howard and Hampton University, are doing in this space.
Thank you so much. And I see, Dr. Gilliam, you're typing your response to that question, so everyone will be able to see it here in a moment. But as we are closing, I want to give each of you an opportunity to share one final word of joy, word, not just one word, a word or phrase of joy for Black students in regard to your project and how they can kind of move forward with this knowledge that you have now provided us.
A word of joy is for students who are at HBCUs. When you are encountering your campuses, notice the artwork and notice the life and the work of the artist, because this gift has been given to you. And most of the art that I've seen is an expression of hope and joy. And another example is the artwork of Richard Hunt that is in front of the Blackburn Center at Howard University. And it is just a representation of it's called A Bridge and Beyond, and it's a representation of this is now, but we also have the future to look forward to, where you are going somewhere great in addition to being somewhere great right now. So those are my words of joy.
And I think my words of joy for students are rest does count and it is a form of resistance. Our students carry a lot and it gets very heavy now as we're inching towards the end of the semester. I had a student introduce herself and she said, the real world problem that I'm trying to solve is. And imagine how much weight it carries for someone to feel like they have to solve a problem, a real world problem at this moment, and sometimes maybe feeling like they have to do it by themselves. And so I just want students to know that it is okay to rest. It is okay to take breaks. You can't do the work if you're not here. So please take care of yourselves and your mental health.
Thank you both. So this session reminds us that, evidence is not only data, it is also narrative, space, and lived experience. So thank you for helping us reimagine how HBCUs, impact and Black student impact is defined and measured. And in closing, across these fellows sessions, we see a clear through line. HBCU research is not simply descriptive, it is interventionist. It names inequities, constructs new frameworks, and advances a broader democratic agenda. So thank you all for attending this final fellows presentation session. You all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.